Welcome, Chrisman's Radio. We are back with Dr. Danny, bro in the brain, and we have teased you with all things shoulders for 2.5, maybe 3 weeks now. And
What she said.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, 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 yeah. I literally texted you today and said, "All right, we're doing shoulders, right? No tangents." So
yeah, we have a couple of those every now and then.
yeah. So despite us talking like all things newbie for the last 20 some minutes, we are going to talk shoulders, which is funny because I actually trained chest and shoulders today. And I think where we would start, I know you and I have already touched on rear delts with the back portion, part two. Is there anything that comes to your mind just off the top of your head? Because I want to start and knock out that rear delt since if you're just watching this as a standalone, are there anything that come to mind right offhand for you that if you're having a problem connecting to your rear delts or growing your rear delts, that you would give as like maybe one or two pieces of advice to really get that muscle working?
Yeah, very, very simply, I would say change the arm height angle. And the reason for that is that anytime we're training one head of the delt, whether it's front, change front delts, side or rear, we want to make sure that obviously that head of the humerus is angled the way we want it to. And a lot of times, different people's shoulder blades sit in a different position. And if this moves up and over, it's going to change the orientation of the ball, which means we're going to need to take a little bit of a different approach to getting rear delts. So like when I do band pull aparts for rear delts for me, I'm actually starting up here and pulling this way
Right.
rather than here. Um, so I think just changing the arm height angle is something I look at a lot, and then really, really playing with resistance profiles. Like if you can't feel a muscle, really manipulate short and lengthened range. But
That is such incredible advice because if I think about, for me, if I'm thinking about like the lateral portion of working my side delt or rear delt, sorry, I'm thinking about my go-to exercise will be reverse pec deck, which is essentially perpendicular to the ground, bend over rear laterals, which is going to be almost where my torso is parallel to the ground, where I'm laying face down on an incline bench, or like a high cable pull apart, which is like what you're talking about with band pull apart. So all of that lever height is something I've done instinctually, but never thought about it the way you did, which is really intelligent way to attack it. Where if you're having trouble, say, everyone says, "Oh, well, you got to get good at, like bent over dumbbell laterals." I always feel like most people can't get that exercise. Like it's really hard for them to. How I do it at least is like I turtle shell my back. I try to not let my shoulder blades point up
yeah,
and go
very,
out. Where I see this in the gym all the time. Like people do them, and their shoulder blades are bam, they just pop up, and I'm like, what do you think's working there? And they're,
yeah.
yeah, you know,
Well, I think that the hard thing about the longer that we train, the more, especially depending on like your build, different muscles that need to be kind of like firing. I hate the word firing synergistically, but I'm just gonna. It's
yeah,
Monday.
yes,
We tend to see like serratus in particular gets really, really lost, and
yes,
serratus is one of the muscles that is such a it's such a prerequisite, I think, to getting great rear delt contraction. And
agreed.
the longer you train, other muscles really start to overpower it, and that loss of balance in that system a lot of times makes it harder to find rear delt. So a lot of times I think we hit on like got to get rear delt, rear delt, rear delt, and like position and all that. But a lot of times there's another lacking player in the system that's probably needed to like bring the whole thing forward so that you can find rear delt. Does that make sense?
Oh, without a doubt. Like
Yeah.
what you just said there, and then pair that with, I feel like so many people want to let their traps steal so much of that load. And, if you're thinking about a bent over a lateral, most people are probably going to use what, 15s to 30s. So you don't have that much weight. And if you're not making a majority of it go to your rear delt, do you think it's going to grow? Or at least that's my thought. That was always my thought process because I was someone who, no matter what exercise I did for shoulders, I always felt it in my upper trap or mid trap.
Hmm.
And I used to hate training shoulders because I could never get on it. And I was like, I hate this fucking muscle. It's stupid. Like, not only is it horrible, but I can't feel it.
Yeah.
Um, so I know for me specifically, I had to humble myself, lower the weight, and say, guess what? You know what? I'm gonna figure out how to make this muscle work, even if I have tens in my hands.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are a lot of tools that we can use with that, right? And so one thing that I've done with people and with myself too is like using isometrics at different angles to see where it's easiest to like actually connect with the muscle. And I go, great, if I connect with it really well here, I'm going to do a lot of that. So I think when I first really actually started to feel my rear delt was actually more of like a Y position, like coming back.
Yeah,
this way rather than out, which
Yeah.
again, for me, like, I'm good here and I'm good here. I'm like all kinds of unstable out here. So that was kind of a clue to me that was like, oh, okay, well, if I can find them here, do I maybe want to consider taking my cable pulley up a little higher if I'm doing a reverse fly? Probably. So I think just like even going through some things like an isometric to see like where do you actually feel the muscle can be a stupid, simple way to start getting better with movement selection, which is a big part of the problem, I
What's
think.
really interesting is it's funny that you said that. I literally posted a short on YouTube today about how to feel your side delts. And I think I told you about this of like you stand in the doorway and you just push your hands against the door frame like this
Yeah,
aggressively. And it that to me, it teaches you, and you do it for like a slow 10 count for an iso hold, and that blows up my side delt like crazy. But it's a kind of twofold, right? You get the iso hold, but also the reason I thought about trying that was it teaches you to take your hands out, where I think most people think hands up. And
yeah,
that's I've coached in multiple ways. Hands out, sweep the floor with your knuckles, try to touch the walls beside you, like all different types of coaching cues to get people to learn how to like, hey, we have to go out with the weight, even though it's also going to simultaneously go up.
yeah. I think with those isometrics too, that was something you had me doing in Chicago prep, and you had me doing a shoulder quad set at the end, ended with a like isometric and mid range against the band, basically as long as I could.
Yes.
And you can really, I think when you start doing that, you can really start to differentiate when you're starting to get delt versus trap, things like that. And anytime I'm having someone do an isometric, what I have them do is instead of going like, okay, just squeeze the muscle, just go find it, just go push out. I have them think about the accelerator in a car and slowly ramp that up. Because if you ask for too much too quickly, and a lot of people probably experience this, where they're like, okay, I'm using all the force I can't feel it. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've got everything working. You've
Right.
irradiated that entire freaking area. So of course you can't feel the delt. So I think just kind of knowing when people want to be specific versus when they want to actually just get like the entire upper body engaged is helpful too.
Uh, Agreed. I think the final thing to finish with like rear delts before we move on to the side is I actually do like a rope face pull for rear delts if people are having trouble feeling them for higher reps, like 15, 20, 30. That works really well. Any type of chest supported pronated grip always feels great to me. If you don't have a chest supported row, you could do it on like a CD cable row with a normal straight lat pull down bar and just pull
Mhm.
like your like chest or sternum is what I've kind of always thought
Yeah.
about as another great way to really hit rear delts. If you struggle with like rear or pec deck or band pull aparts. I think another thing that I should probably also mention is we were talking ISO holds, and I know a lot of people think spider crawls aren't ISO holds, but they are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and so many people do those for God, my brain is not working today. Rotator cuff health. I like that, but to me, that's like a side effect of me trying to trash my rear delts.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, cool. I can hammer my rear delts and get some rotator cuff work. Awesome. That's two birds with one stone in my like how I've always looked at it. Um, because I don't know if I can't remember, have I ever had you do like spider crawls for time as opposed to reps?
And that's usually how I prescribe it for people too.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's so bad and so great at the same
Yes,
time.
yes. The most pumped I ever got from a shoulder workout that I remember, John had me do. It was 6 sets for shoulders. So it was bent over laterals, dumbbell side laterals, and dumbbell front raises. So you would do 12 of each of those for 2 sets, but superset that with a minute of spider crawls. So it was 6 minutes of spider crawls total for the whole. And like, listen, the whole workout might have taken like 13 minutes. But in his words, it looked and felt like my shoulders had been stung by a bunch of bees. Like
Nice.
it was horrible.
Well, I think the rotator cuff is something too. Like even if spider crawls were more for rotator cuff,
Mhm.
there's so much good that happens. Like generally the people who have like blown out, just awesome looking 3D shoulders, generally the rotator cuff is high functioning and things are timed well. It's got high endurance, all those things. So that's another one of those things that if we're not trying to like train that directly, people who don't have that 3D look or people who have a really hard time developing their side and rear delts often do have some rotator cuff issues. So I think the two go hand in hand. And that's one of those things where, yeah, healthy shoulders. Let me ask you this. When you're having people do face pulls, because there are different ways you can set up, right?
Mhm.
how do you like to have people set up for different, like when you're determining someone's setup with that, what tells you that you want to take one setup over another?
So to me, the first thing you have to determine is if you want to do them seated or standing. Um, and to me, that comes like if you are a lighter female or male, like seated is probably going to be your better option because you can ground and base better. Where if you think about like what I'm going to put on a face pull for with a rope, like I might use 60 to 70 pounds. Well, okay, cool. I'm that's not going to pull me forward towards the cable stack.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm going to opt for those standing because I'm lazy and don't want to drag a box over.
Fair enough.
So that to me is like if it feels like you're getting pulled towards a cable stack and you aren't stable, like I want to, that's what's going to determine standing versus seated for me. Next is going to be determining what to do with your hands, like the Ricky Bobby thing, right? Like where do you where do you feel for me?
I'm so glad you just went there.
Right, yeah. I like a longer rope. And I like my like the butt of my hand to face the cable stack. Meaning like I grab it like this and then pull it towards my face. I'm not going to do that motion on the camera. For multiple reasons. Uh, but yeah, so the butt of my hand facing the cable stack. If you feel better with your like, I guess your index finger or thumb pointing the cable stack, and this is going to take you practicing. I've also had guys do it with like two single handle D handles and do it neutral and pull that way. And that's again, that's all based upon shoulder health for me and like what again feels best and natural for you. So seated versus standing, grip facing, or the handle is going to be the next determining factor. And then for me, like what I want to think about is I don't want to let that for most people let it all the way out. I want to keep tension on that delt. So I'll actually leave like a soft bend in my elbow. I'll never take it fully out
Mhm.
and just kind of it's like a very rhythmic, like piston almost like cadence.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
it's not going to either end of range of motion and stopping. It's just like continuous 15, 20 reps, and it is burning like fire. So that's kind of what I towards to go toward.
How about like with regards to cable height?
Okay, perfect.
Because I
Um,
could see again, like I could justify this 1,000 different ways because we could get someone set up and feel a muscle 1,000 different ways. So how do
okay.
you like to get that set up for people?
So here's what's funny. I was forced into high because at elite you can't adjust the cable stack.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
If I wanted to do an advanced setup, I probably could have taken it to like that dual pulley he has that
Hmm.
you and I did peg deck, so not peg deck, like high cable crossovers on. I could have done that, but usually that's usually taken. So I just normally just do it in the cable stack that only has a high or a low option.
Hmm.
If I'm thinking about for most people, I tend to, like you said, I like to pull from a higher than eye height. So it's like up to down. Reasoning for that is I always felt like that's going to give me more shoulder and less opportunity for pulling with lat.
I'm kind of trying with like just hearing you talk through this. I'm wondering with regards to both grip as well as height, if we could be able to predict someone's op optimal setup just based on their shoulder IR and ER, which is going to be a
Hmm.
function of how their scap sits. So like there's people who like you can look at them and their scaps just sit kind of like really, really high up and tipped forward
Yes.
versus those whose scaps sit really, really like pushed forward, like
Right.
you're a push.
Yeah.
I would wonder if there's a correlation between, those two things. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there is. Like we could probably, get 10 people in a room and test them and be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You
But
know, staying on
I
that
don't know.
topic, which is really interesting, the posture for bent over laterals for me only works is if I go like hardcore turtle shell, like hunch my upper back, like thinking about driving my mid trap to the ceiling. If I do anything with like neutral spine or any type of like extended spine, I'm not on my rear delt at all. Do you
Yeah.
believe that is solely based upon what you're talking about with how my scapula sit, or do you think that's for everyone in general?
I think it's really individualized because if you took me and you did that same thing,
Hmm.
instead of getting rounding in my spine, which separates my scap. So when you think about creating all that space between your scaps, and
Hmm.
when you're turtle shelling or like rounding,
Right,
basically what you're trying to do is create space there and create a rounding in your rib cage and thoracic spine.
right.
Some people don't have that kind of mobility. Like I don't have that. So if I just look from our turtle shell, it
Mhm.
ends up just taking the front of my sternum and depressing it down, which changes the shape of the upper rib cage. think like first four ribs maybe, and
Right.
that's going to change how the scab moves. So I think a lot of it, depending on, the person, the degree of turtle shell that we want is going to be different, right? So like you and Dave can turtle shell a little bit more. I've got two guys I just brought on actually who are big pros, but they're a kind of more narrow rib bias.
Yeah.
And they can't, like, if I tell them to turtle shell, they're
Mm.
just going to get depressed sternum. It throws off their shoulders. So like if you take yourself here and you take your whole sternum
Yeah.
and like you just do this.
Right. Like that. Yeah.
No, like take like
Oh,
don't round
yeah.
the shoulders. Take the sternum and push it. Try to push it down. Yours doesn't move.
No, not a bit.
So for you, you're like anything you're getting, you're probably getting a little bit of actual rounding through the rib cage
Uh,
versus if I just drop this down, you see how my shoulders just like melt. And
yeah.
then if I hit our front relaxed here, that's that dip that we've talked about in people's posing.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
1000%. Yes.
Okay. Do those dots just connect a little bit?
Yeah. Because I'm like, I don't think I can make myself do that watching you do that.
It's cool. I've gotten all small. We know this.
And I think the last thing I want to finish up with rear delt here is like, those they're in like doctor's offices. It's like those four metal balls and they like hit, it's like this centrifugal force
Oh,
thing.
yeah, the pendulums. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I think about when I do benevolent laterals. Is just taking my hand and being that swinging ball. Like the
Oh,
ball
totally.
is my hand with a dumbbell in it, and then it's just literally swinging, which is why I like to create as much space through everything to come this way, and then it's like, and I
Hmm.
just swing. And I know a lot of times when people probably see me do that, like, oh God, that dude is cheating like crazy, and I'm like, nope, like that's where I feel we're dealt.
I think that so one cue I use for people a lot that's kind of similar to this is just having that fixed rotation point. Like that's basically what you're looking at there.
Yeah.
What I tend to find is people end up getting a lot of like elbow extension, they end up getting tricep in there, things like that. And so I tell people like literally just visualize that ball and socket and you're only rotating around that ball and socket.
Yep.
That's it.
Yes.
And of course there's going to be some accessory motion with that. Like we're going to see this gap move. It's going to move. It's okay.
Right.
Some people physically have the constraints to where they cannot do a rear delt movement without their scap moving, just
Oh,
based on the
right.
spine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you and I are both on the same point of like, if you feel like your rear delt's blown up, even if it doesn't look perfect, it's probably doing what it needs to do.
Yes, you and I agree with that 100%. I'm always like, erase what everyone says perfect form is and do what you, if it feels good and it blows up and it's sore, hey, we're winning. Like,
Yeah, totally.
change it. And it's kind of one of those things, like I've also thought with every other muscle in my body, if one or two exercises don't fit the perfect form, maybe your other two will. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm
Mm,
getting what perfect form is for say two out of four exercises, and the other two I'm going simply based on what my body feels like moving through space. And that to me is how you can create, in my mind, a continuum of growth and progress, both mentally and physically.
yeah.
That might be a little too deep than most people probably want to hear me talk about shoulders, but
No, I think I mean, gosh, I took a lot out of that, right? Because I think everyone wants to feel like they're doing something right. No one
yeah,
wants to feel like they have to just walk in and YOLO and not, and break every rule. That kind of makes people be like, oh, am I really doing anything okay? So I think you just set a really good standard there where if like, let's say over the course of a week, you're training rear delts twice and you're doing two movements per session, maybe on one of those sessions or on each session, you have one that's done textbook and one that feels just how you need to feel it.
correct. Yes.
Great solution.
Yep. And it's like not only with form, but I think with range of motion is big there. Because I've always felt like a shortened range of motion for all delt. I'll be quite honest. All delt range of motion to me feels better shortened, meaning reduced, not working in the shortened range. So let me be specific there.
I got you. Yeah.
The total reduced range of motion has always felt better. Working in the extreme ends have never yielded a lot of progress for me. It's just aided in other muscles doing most of the work in the extreme
Mhm.
end of both contraction and stretch. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's kind of some food for thought. And I think as I've gotten bigger, I've just wrapped my mind around this is okay because it's working.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's a good segue into even side delts too.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot of people use, I think a lot of people we work with end up using some variation of metabolic work in partials and things like that.
Yep.
And I had someone who just did a consult with me. He was saying that he had a rotator cuff issue, and I asked him what his shoulder training looked like.
Yeah.
And he said, I was doing a lot of heavy partials. And I said, okay, well, supraspinatus, that's kind of
Wait.
important. So I asked him what kind of weight he was using, and he was using like 80-pound dumbbells and
Oh,
partials.
Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think even just qualifying that a partial doesn't mean you're in the bottom like 10% of the range. Like you should be hitting at least, I would say up to about 60 degrees, if not a
Agreed.
little higher.
Yep. I always
Um,
try to tell people like 40 to 50% of the range of motion, like is what I
yeah,
think about for me. Yeah. Because if they don't
yeah.
know degrees and an angle, I'm always like, okay, how can I make sense of this? If
Hey,
half,
people want to think about looking in a mirror and aiming at 60 degrees. I don't know why not.
right.
Yeah, a little more than half, I think.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was younger, people would be like, "Hey, Chris, what angle do you set the incline at?" I'm like, "I don't know, fucking know, hole two."
Yeah, I felt that for a long time too. And I had clients be like, oh yeah, like this degree. And I was like, I'm an idiot because I just picked a hole on yeah, anyway. No, just
Right.
bro.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Hole two. That's what I like for incline. Yeah. Yeah.
Also what
Uh,
she said.
yeah. Um. All right.
It
So yeah. So side delts. Let me ask you this. Personally, do you prefer dumbbells or cables or a machine?
depends. What about
Okay.
you?
I would instinctually say dumbbells because that's what I feel like I've gained the most muscle off of. But I actually enjoy all three. Um, if I'm talking through that, I actually a full range of motion or pretty much full range of motion side lateral I prefer with a dumbbell over a machine or a cable. I love a like bottom half like exaggerated stretch partial with a
Yeah,
cable because I can let it get across like the center line of my body where
right.
that's not going to work for a dumbbell if you understand gravity whatsoever. Um, and then for a machine, I love the ability to like lock in, drive my chest into a pad, and really hit about that three-fourths height range of motion. So 75% up the top, and then like reach to a good point of failure there, then like drop the weight a couple holes, meaning heavier, and just work that bottom quarter and
Yeah,
just burn it out. And like, if I think if most people saw me do that, like how those machines are set up, I'll tilt my camera down to where you're like this. I straighten my arms and with the pad there on my elbow and just out. And it's like, as long as I don't let my chin dip to my collarbone, I can stay on that side delt and it feels like it's just working like all the way down to like that brachialis. And I swear, like when all the fat comes off, like that's why that is such a hard like drop in like peak and valley and creates that illusion of like even bigger delts than I probably actually have. It's,
nice.
yeah.
I was going to ask if you prefer machines that have like that you're locked in here, or if you prefer something that lets you keep an arm straight, like a standing lateral.
So if I'm doing like the three-fourths range of motion, I'll hold the handle on it, and it's an old Body Master one that we have at Elite. Um, or like if you think about like the Life Fitness or Hammer Strength version of it, very similar. And then when I do my partials, I literally straighten my arm and just go.
Yeah.
That feels better. And I can't honestly explain to you why, because you would think like, okay, the pad didn't change on my arm height. Why would it matter if your arms are straight? And it just feels better to me.
There's a little bit different rotation demand. So
Okay.
the more you're pronated, basically, if you've got segments here that are, this is pronation, right? So we have to stay in a little bit more IR than you probably wanting to stay in.
Yeah.
So by letting you stay in a range that your shoulder is best at, you're not having to, yeah. Plus,
Yeah.
it's just a shortened lever too, more direct contact.
Yes. Yes. And I think something that we should really touch on here with like dumbbell side laterals. This is something you and I differ on structurally so much is I very much like I think about if I'm going to teach it to someone who I guess is structurally built like me, is I'm like, okay, think about hitting a front relax. That's my starting position. And then I kind of posture up and then pop the dumbbells. And it's very rhythmic. And I tend to be on the heavier side of what most would consider like probably good form. And it looks almost kind of, again, it's very, some would probably say it's like inertia based.
I don't think it looks sloppy at all. And
Okay.
I've seen you do them, and to me, it looks like the way that dumbbell lateral should be done.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay. Good. Can you explain how that is different for you?
yeah, so for me, again, like my shoulders, if we just look at them, like they sit in a different position than yours at rest. Mine tend to live a little bit more in IR. My scapula is tipped forward, a little bit more ER'd and abducted.
Right.
So for me, like I almost need to let them just stay in that position because here, my side delt's actually on top. If I go too chest up, I actually get more front delt. Um, so I think for people again, like you and I always talk about this, we always talk about like if you just visually look at it, like let's keep it really simple. Does it
Yeah.
look like the muscle's where it needs to be?
Right.
Um,
Yep.
and I try to keep my hands really loose. I think you probably do too,
Yep.
just so we're not like over irradiating here.
Correct. It is definitely not a death grip on anything shoulder related.
Yeah. And then for me, if I keep really, really tall posture, my center mass just gets shoved forward, and it's so hard for me to actually drive good delt control
Yes.
because I can't internally match the forces needed to match what's going on here.
Right.
Does that make sense? The
It,
idea of internal pressure management is people write it off because they're like, oh, it's nerdy. I don't want to talk. It's just like internal pressure. But like no, I mean, being able to, you want to think about if we've got these weights coming down on us, whatever that is, even if it's just a, dumbbell side lateral delt, we have to be able to have the forces internally to kind of match that.
yeah.
And our ability to do that through the rib cage is going to be a large function of how shoved forward we are or how depressed forward we are in the front. So those are the two extremes is you've got you and then I'm not that bad, but you've got other people who have that like their spine is actually kyphotic.
Oh,
They're just born that way. Like that's
yep.
just their spine shape.
Yeah.
Um, two ends of that swing pendulum there.
Correct.
Um, so I think, for people who I don't want to say it's just bracing, but like how many times do you watch people like getting a lot of extraneous movement in their dumbbell lateral raises?
Yes. Yep.
And you kind of wonder like, okay, no, it's just a 10 pound or 20 pound or 25 or 30 pound dumbbell. Um, But what's driving the bus there? And if we're getting a lot of body sway, I think we're letting the dumbbell move us quite a bit. That's
Right.
usually an indicator that we're not having the internal pressure to actually
Yes.
sustain.
I think there's also a couple things you touched on that I absolutely love, and that's how I teach it a lot, is when someone comes into town and or when I used to train people in person, I'd always say, we're gonna get in front of a mirror, we're gonna watch. Like,
Hmm.
do it the way you were doing it. Tell me which muscle works. What do you see firing? And like, what's a side lateral? It's normal side delt. I'm like, okay, cool, erase that. Think about your day one of lifting and you're just doing this exercise. And I say, hey, make a T with your arms. What is it? What in the mirror, what's visually stimulating? And like, well, my front delts are working. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's always like I always tell them is like what's on top. And it's gonna be hard to see because I have a black shirt, but it's like if I'm doing side lateral like this, that's my front delt. If I need side, I have to get from me there to
For
recall
sure.
that rotation. And that took me a fucking year to realize how to do.
So when I'm looking at videos for people, people assume I only want to see videos of the main like big movements pressing. I'm like, no, 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 I gotta see this stuff because like one of what you just hit on there with like that, I tell people control your elbow pit.
Yes. Yeah.
Technical term is going to keep it a fossa, but controlling like where this is in space is going to give you a lot more information about what's actually working and what's not.
Yes.
Like big, whether it's cable, dumbbell, anything else, because we can think about our hands all day long, but we got a lot of mobility here.
Yes.
So
Great.
we need to control that a little bit more proximally to impose greater demands on the actual.
Because I think like what I grew up on hearing with shoulders for side laterals was pour a pitcher of water. Well, fuck me. I can pour that like this. I can do this. That's
Yeah,
usually
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
can move my wrist.
There are more efficient ways to accomplish that task, my brother.
Correct. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, what muscle is working, which muscle's on top? Can you see it? Is it visually stimulating? Like those are all things that for side delts, I had to force myself to learn and do.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, cool. Like, now I've mastered it with say 15-pound dumbbells. What happens if I can double that weight over the course of a 6 months to a year? And it's like, okay, now we're getting delt progress.
Hmm.
Um,
I
and
think.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I think the modality of what you use is to hyper fixated on these days, where people are like, oh, dumbbells are non-efficient. Shut up. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
not for you, but I can tell you this: I've grown a lot of side delt with dumbbells. And if you put me in a basement in a COVID scenario with 10 clients, male and five female, five males, I bet you I can grow their delts with dumbbells. Um, and it's not because we have accesses to IGF-1. Like, stop it.
I think the other thing that you when we're talking about orientation, like orientation of the shoulder and everything,
Yeah.
I think being able to like really see that in its full scope is one of those superpowers in every training, in every muscle group that if we can see that can really be helpful. So for me, like my best side delt movement is actually a Y raise.
Oh, right.
Whether
Yeah.
standing with a cable, like coming across here, where again, like my arm is pulling across, or line cable Y raises have probably been my bread and butter
Yes.
this year. And it's
Yep.
been probably the best connection I've had to my delts in a long time.
Yes. Yep.
And once I got good at connecting there, I mean, that's a really fun rest pause set. Or that's a really fun Chris pause set,
Oh, yeah.
even.
You just said the Y raise. I feel like that's a great transition because I think a lot of people look at a Y raise and they think, oh, front delt. And for me, when I do that exercise, it's all side and a little bit of front. So it's like 75-25 if I put a percentage on it, maybe even 80-20. Um,
Oh, and I
and
get a little bit weird too.
oh yeah,
Mine's
yes.
more like side rear bias.
Oh heck yeah. That made me think aggressively why. Um, um, but it's so, and you said you like doing those on cables. Have you tried them with, is it the same way with dumbbells?
Like chest supported,
Yes.
then I get more front.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Um, because I think now that you said that, if I'm on a cable, I agree with you. Like it takes that little percentage of front and flips it to the rear. And then on the dumbbell version, which is what I typically do, it's front, it switches back to front. So yeah.
Is that
Oh,
like the only direct front delt training that you ever do, pretty much?
yes. If you count like incline dumbbell pressing, Smith machine, and barbell pressing, like because I would be lying if I didn't say my front delt gets pumped doing that. But I don't do I can't I don't think I've done a shoulder press in a decade, and I just don't do a lot of front raises with dumbbells or easy bar, cable, you name it. Like I, yeah, I don't feel like it's necessarily worth my time based upon the shape of my shoulder because it's developed on its own kind of like subconsciously, so to speak, or
Yeah.
indirectly, I guess is a better word. Right? Like, I mean, I think you'll appreciate this because your husband's enormous. Like, when's the last time he's probably directly trained traps?
Well, he gets it just by turtle shelling everything. And I'm like, turtle shell less, brother. Well, not brother. That'd be weird. That'd be weird.
Yeah, yes. So it's like, I mean, you look at like someone like that or me, like I'm not doing traps for the upper traps for the most part. I'm
No.
gonna do direct forearm. I mean, I'm not doing wrist curls. Like, I feel like front delt is, yeah, all thrown in.
The fact that you just mentioned wrist curls, the number of people that have like asked me if they need more direct forearm work. I'm like, maybe if you're CBOM and that's your like, the last thing you need to develop, but like, come on, let's talk about ROI here. But this is
Yes,
funny because I think a couple years ago, oh my God, it is a Monday. A couple weeks ago, I texted you about front delt training.
yes, yeah,
And I like I don't ever really have many of my people, unless they need like some structural work or something like that. I mean, like, I think there's something to be said for just having endurance and something like a dumbbell six plate. Okay, great, sure.
yes, yeah,
I think glue raises are also really, really good just for overall like shoulder health. But if we're looking at like strictly for hypertrophy of the front delt,
yeah,
I cannot in any world with someone who has an appreciable amount of mass and is trying to grow a big upper body based on their division. I'm not talking about like bikini competitors because they're
yeah,
not trying to grow a chest.
right,
Imagine that you're not getting enough direct front delt work, even if it's done through some of your chest pressing movements, some of your other, incline movements, things like that.
yes.
Um, it's one of those things I saw there's another PT who's like trying to be more present in the bodybuilding world,
Hmm.
being very contrarian on this is why you need to train your front delt. And he's competed one time and he looked good. Um, but he's only been at this for a couple of years.
Right, yes,
And I wanted to be like, I don't know. That's one of those small muscle groups that if we're thinking about workload allocation, not just from the standpoint of development, but we want to think overall health, right? When that muscle gets fatigued, if you're training it, what's the potential risk?
right, yeah,
Because that force is going to get reallocated elsewhere. And a lot of times it ends up being bicep tendon. We end up
yes,
getting funky things going on with the labrum. We get funky things going on with the rotator cuff.
yep,
So we need to think beyond just development and think about like, okay, well, that's a relative, like it's a small muscle.
yeah, oh yeah,
What happens when that fatigues if we're using load that it's even remotely heavy. Well, we're going to start to kick on other muscles. And the sneaky thing about that is it's not like it goes from like that muscle is great and all the way on to all the way fatigued and everything's elsewhere. That happens gradually throughout a set. So you may not even know it until later.
Yeah.
I think that's where just kind of being smart about injury management that
Yeah.
comes with time.
I always say to people like that get say that, and I'm like, okay, is the person you're referring to with that, do they have a structurally weak, or is it preventing them from doing something else great? Right? Like, so if you looked at someone and assessed them like, oh, your front delt's really holding you back in your incline barbell pressing. Okay, cool. Maybe we should add something for direct front delt work. But overall, like I would think, man, like we only have so much gas for the gas tank for the week.
Yeah.
Couldn't you just keep doing incline barbell press and say, hey, fix it, bro? Like that'll fix it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Um, then I've also heard like really intelligent people say, hey, it's a muscle, we should train it. Well, yes, I agree. But like I was just saying with like forearms and upper traps, why? If they're getting stimulated and they're growing indirectly from your chest pressing, if you do shoulder press, why in the world am I going to do 20-pound front raises when I could, have 130-pound dumbbells in my hands? Like,
Mhm.
what's going to put on more tissue? If I'm thinking about it logically, and again, with energy management, could you throw a couple sets, say at the end of a shoulder day? Yeah, but are you just going through the motions at that point? Like, because you'd be better
Yeah.
off going home resting and eating?
Well, I think that's where that's where any coach is going to look at a program or a day or training day or whatever and look at the first couple movements and be like, that's like the primary thing we're after, right?
Yes. Yep.
Everything beyond the first couple movements is going to have a secondary or possibly a tertiary effect.
Mhm.
So I think that's where we need to start thinking, do we want some other tertiary effect in there? Like I love like, kind of want like one of these guys who you're coming up and over because
Yeah.
you're also getting a little bit out. Like, are you going to get some rotator cuff love in there? You may be going to get a little bit of scap separation, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think at times there's a place to like put a movement in for a secondary and tertiary effect.
Mhm.
Um, but that should be the goal. I mean, does
Great.
anyone train front delts in like a really hard way anymore other than like some,
Not that I know. I don't. The only person I used to see people doing that was Branch and Johnny, and they were doing like
is
100-pound dumbbell raises because they could and it looks awesome on film.
yeah, yeah, you got the swing going on in the heads with it. We all know
Do
that one.
you remember that movement? I don't know what the hell they are called. Like we always called them like steering wheels, where you like take a plate, take it up
Oh,
your chest, and turn it. Man, I'm like, how much time did I waste doing that stupid shit?
yeah, I gotta say I never did that.
Um,
And I'm really, really glad.
yeah.
It's always interesting to me too. I think a lot of people get a lot of pec involvement for things like that. I mean, even if you're
Yes.
just doing a plate reach for like a lower body warm up, so
Yeah.
many of us are getting more pec than front delt. So kind of in the same vein, like think about what are you actually feeling?
Right.
I mean, I feel like that's always what we talk about.
I think when I program myself personally, and then like especially with clients, I always think about, okay, for shoulders, what are most people lacking? Like you can never have too big of rear and side delts. I don't think I've ever had a judge say to me or any of my competitors, man, your front delt is really lagging.
Yeah, right.
And I've trained a lot of people. Now I've heard side and rear delt's got to come way up, not
All the
personally,
time.
but for a lot of people. So I'm like, why in the world would I waste your time and energy when I could say take those 2 or 3 sets of front delts and put them on the reverse pec deck, put them on the bent over lateral, put them on some kind of pronated row, and then improve the drastic overall look of the physique. So yeah, this is kind of my thought process. To finish up shoulders, I do have a very specific question for you. Because I think people would say, "Oh, you guys have not talked about pressing at all."
Hmm.
When I was young, like I wanted monstrous shoulders, and I thought the key to it was shoulder pressing. So within a shoulder day, I used to train shoulders and traps together on the same day, first day of the week. I would do 2, if not 3 presses every single session. And I thought if long as those numbers went up, that I was going to grow shoulders. Sadly, that never worked for me. Did they get better? Yes, but they were still pathetic by the time I got to John, and then he taught me how to train shoulders. Um, but the question I wanted to ask you is when I would do shoulder pressing, dumbbells I liked the most, but they were the most cumbersome to get into place. Hammer strength or Smith machine, I felt like I had the best overall connection to because I didn't have to worry about kicking big dumbbells up into place. So I felt the safest in one of those two options. And then I always did barbell seated shoulder press because I thought I had to, but it felt the worst. Like the amount of negative pain I would get on that, like through my neck and traps, like nothing. I never would do that and think, oh man, my shoulder just got hammered. Like I would always be like, that crushed my soul. Um, do you have any inclination of why that might have been?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Shoulder training, we can look at a couple of things. We want to look at with any body part, like let's deconstruct problem solving this, right? Like I can give an answer, but that's not teaching people how to think. We always want to think about what's the difference between a barbell, a Smith machine, and the dumbbells. Okay, well, we have the inherent quality of stability. That one's pretty obvious, right?
Right.
I think the other one that people are going to look at are degrees of freedom, meaning
Yes. Yep.
with the dumbbell, you're going to be moving, you've got all of this space to
Right.
move.
Yep.
Um, and so with something like a barbell, the two things that are going to contribute to a movement feeling not great are going to be load, and if you can't match the movement pattern to the degrees of freedom that are best for your body.
Okay. Yep.
A barbell being a symmetrical object and heavy loaded, I would put that as a like high exchange rather than high growth movement, right? You're
Right.
putting a lot of weight on something that has an imposed bar pathing,
Mhm.
and you're having to stabilize it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we've got the Smith, better option there, right? It's stabilized, and so you can work on actually contracting the muscle because the CNS is also having to coordinate a super mobile joint that sits on top of another mobile joint that has to be able to expand
Right.
to reduce that pressure down.
Yes.
And then dumbbells, I think feel really good because I think there's a lot of good stuff that happens when you do force the nervous system actually co-contract and synchronize different muscle groups across a joint, right? You're getting full control of that whole joint across
Yes.
multiple planes of motion. There's a lot of nuance I could put into that, but if
Yep.
I were going to break it down that like as simply as possible,
Yes.
that's how I look at it. You've got the two extremes and the one in the middle. Ordinarily, I would say there's a time and a place for each one, except that in the context of a seated barbell overhead press, I mean, I would even say standing is better,
Right. Yep. Yep.
um, just from the degrees of freedom standpoint.
What's really interesting is, and I think that's why I always bang on that drum of like, listen to your body, it'll tell you.
Mhm.
Because I think about how many sets I wasted in my life doing seated military press because I thought I had to. And like that was the secret. I just had to find a way to get to three plates, right? And what's really interesting is I was always great at barbell pressing for chest, flat, decline, incline. But on the military press, I was not, it just didn't feel good. I wasn't strong at it and it didn't feel good. And I always wonder, like, was that negative connotation to the lift imposing its will on my ability to grow? And then I realized, like, this just isn't for me. So,
Well, and I've alluded on a lot of episodes now to this like structural bias stuff. And again, like for anyone that's interested, Bill Hartman is the guy who really has kind of structured some of the learning around this. But we've got these two different archetypes, and certain people are just going to be better at certain motions. And
right,
inherently, like we know this about people, right? So what Bill has done is basically like made that a system that makes more sense. And you kind of go, oh, and then you realize there's a lot more to it with regards to like fluid dynamics, pressure management, everything else. So Um, I freaking love a barbell overhead press, especially a scrape the rack press.
oh yeah,
That is a bomb movement for me because it allows my scaps to tip posteriorly.
right. Yes.
So,
I did those with John for many years. I don't say I'm overly strong with them by any means, but they did feel that felt so superior than a barbell seated military.
mhm.
He always programmed that at with the last exercise of the day, and I don't think I ever had more than like three-quarters of side on there. So what is that, 195? So it's not heavy. Um,
Yeah.
but it worked. That was a good feeling. And then what's really interesting is as I started to think about it more, I was like, what's the difference between this and a Smith machine? But then it's like you aren't having to forcibly drive into that rack as aggressively because the Smith machine is letting that happen.
Right. And
Um,
that's the magic. So for you, you live in a position where your scap is already tipped down and closed.
right.
So you don't necessarily need more of that. For someone like me, or if you're working with someone whose scaps just like pop off a lot, that's
Yes.
a great movement for them because it's going to use serratus to kind of pull that forward.
Right. Yes. And that's I hope what we're trying to teach through these conversations on here is the elevated way of thinking. as opposed to this exercise is good. It's like, no, this exercise is good for this segment of people.
Yeah,
And if we want to modify that lift for others based upon their structure, like that's how we do it.
yeah.
And then from my standpoint, I'm always like, hey, like just listen to your body.
Well, I mean, it is that simple, and it's also, Pandora's box, right? Because we think about exercises like a very specific, we move A to B, but all we're doing is like facilitating certain muscles. So even the scrape the rack press for you, like even though your scaps are pretty good at moving that posterior tip, uh, are you getting a lot of other secondary stuff going on the front side that's
Yeah.
letting you actually open up and probably let your shoulders feel great? Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just recognizing, like, always having a curious eye. I run a mentorship group, and one of the things we do is go through a client's movement and peel through. Here's why this feels good, or why it shouldn't. Stuff like that. So
I think the conundrum that we run into is because you hear really intelligent people and really successful people say, hey, Danny, you need to do the hard stuff. And, if we're using this exercise, the example I just gave of military press, they're going to say, okay, Chris, you're weak at it. You're not good at it. And you don't feel it. So that's hard, right? I'm like, yeah, that's really hard. Where,
you gotta just get better at it.
right, I just have to knuckle down. Like I need to, I need to white knuckle it, right? Where you and I both know that if I did the same shit in a Smith machine, I'd get double the result. Um, and trust me, if you put 3 1/4 plates on a Smith machine, that's going to be hard too. And so, I feel like that's what people are missing, right? Where it's like, I could put, I front squatted 365 for a dozen. That's hard, but it doesn't tax my quads like a yoke bar squat did, which is equally as hard. And I think that concept is really hard for most to grasp, where it's like, hey, all exercise is hard as hard as if you do it right. A perfect example of that is six ways that you just talked about. What do we have? 7.5 to 10 and 12.5 pound dumbbells in our hands, and it's breaking our soul. That's hard. Do I think that exercise is solely going to build a set of shoulders that most would respect? Probably not. That's a polished exercise, but it's super challenging and hard, and I can break people on that. So I think that's what a lot of times we run into is that like angel and devil, right? Where it's like he says do the hard, or she says do the hard stuff. Well, this is what feels good. Okay, take the stuff that feels good and just do it hard. Is kind of my
100%.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I've been doing a lot with Dave lately, and it's been freaking crazy. I mean, his quads were already good, but like, see, he's taken 9 plates on that Arsenal hack, and the last couple weeks, we've just gotten really, really picky with other elements, right? So like for him, it's all about waist control, and it's like, okay, well, if you cannot control your internal pressure with 5 plates, and your gut ends up just getting shoved forward every time you reverse, we got to change that. So let's strip it to 4 and let you actually keep that in. Um, yeah, I think we're starting to see. I just saw someone, a very big influencer, start to post some stuff today about just doing the hard stuff for the sake of progression made him small. And this is someone who 6 months ago was like a progressive overload logbook. So, but he's like 20 something and whatever. So, I think it's going to be really interesting in the next maybe year. I think we're going to see people swing back the other direction and then need to be reminded that like you still got to progress.
Yes. I'm going to admit this online, but I had a guy, he was like, you always preach high rep on legs. And he's like, everything data driven, research based says that you're just absolutely full of shit. Like, he's like, you're wrong. Stop teaching that. And I said, results matter, man. And I am not a genetic phenom by any means. And I would challenge you to find someone who's not a high level pro with better legs than me. Like, and that's not an arrogant statement. That's just the truth.
That's true. That is just
Um,
true.
and especially 40 and 40 plus, right? Like,
Oh gosh, man, it's so much easier in your 20s.
right. And he kind of punched back at me and I said, man, I was like, let me tell you this. I said, I say this not to me disrespectful, but I was like, you don't have enough muscle to even be in this conversation. And it's just the truth. Like when I was that size, I shut the fuck up and listened. Like
Hmm.
I knew I had a lot more learning to do, even though I thought I had all the right answers, as we all do as young, like dumb, naive kids, right? Like I say
Yeah,
kids because I started bodybuilding at 19. So I thought at 20 I had it all figured out. I was wrong.
yeah.
Um, and I would have told the world I knew I had all the answers. But I knew that it's like, hey, like let's learn from the people before me. Let's learn from the people who are better than me and the people who have achieved what I want to achieve. Like I need to keep
Right.
my ears open and know that some things I want to hear need to be thrown away. Some things need to be doubled down on, and then sometimes I have to just find my own way. Like,
Totally.
and that's how I've thought about training. And if I'm speaking about shoulders specifically, because they went from the biggest weakness I had on my whole physique to probably one of my best body parts. Um, and it's with tinkering, it's with, John saying, hey man, like we need to take your shoulders, put them after chest, and you need to take your reps up, and we need to stop shoulder pressing that much. And it was like, okay, like I thought in my mind, what do I have to lose? They can't get any
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
next, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah.
Oh, and then it's like 2 years down the road, I was like, man, I have shoulders now. This is pretty cool. And then just double down on that.
Years.
Say what?
2 years. People are going to think it's coming in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. No.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, so then it's like, okay, so I'm just blindly followed, did my absolute best to do that for 2 years. And I was like, hey, cool. Like it worked. Now I just got to keep at it. So then it's like, I hope everyone out there has that same feeling of like when you get on something that's working, like that just the belief for me transcends progress, where it's like, I know this works. It's kind of like when you're with a good guy or girl doing your nutrition, and like you have such blind faith that they're going to get you peeled that you're just like, cool, take it over. If you say more carbs, I'm going to eat them. If you say less carbs, I'm going to eat it. And if you say more cardio, I'm going to do it. And the next thing you know, you're like, man, I'm shredded. Yeah, like it's very
Yeah.
synergistic, like progress to like thought and mindfulness and believing in, hey, what I'm doing every day is working, as opposed to, I feel like a lot of times with the over application of social media, we get so much second guessing where it's like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? And it's like, a lot of times you just need to follow the plan, stick with
Oh,
something.
totally.
So,
And that's something I think that I've really learned in working with you too is just how much easier it is to just trust you. And if you say something is enough, I'm just going to do what you say to do.
right. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
like,
You know, with enough, like I've always thought about that. Right, I think I've said this analogy before. It's like if the nail in the wood is already flush with the wood, you can't beat it anymore. Like,
that's a way better analogy, I think, than a lot of other people use. That's a good one.
because what are you gonna do? Then at that point, you're just beating up the wood around the nail head that's inside the wood. So it's like, hey, like knowing when to say, hey, I've adequately stimulated that muscle. It's time to go home, eat, rest, and recover, and train that muscle again. And if it's a weakness, 3 to 4 days, maybe 5.
Yeah.
And like and I get it because I too was young and excited and wanted to just grow. And it's like, oh, well, let's train it again and let's train it again. And it's like, hey, it gets 2.5 hours. Like you don't have to do every shoulder exercise known to man.
How much was that phase? How much fun was that phase though, where we just go into the gym and do everything and spend hours there because we didn't have
I'll tell
anything
you,
else that we
so
had to do?
to wrap up shoulders, I'll tell you what I used to do. Are you ready? It's barbell press, side lateral, dumbbell side lateral, dumbbell press, pec deck, hammer strength shoulder press, front raise, and then it was some kind of giant set to end where I just grabbed dumbbells and moved until my arms wouldn't move. Yeah.
About right. Sounds about right.
And my shoulders were horrible. Today I did 5 exercises for 2 sets each in 20 minutes. Yeah. And I
I
couldn't
think
have
the fact
done
that you
them.
can get a great pump in 20 minutes too just says a lot about the mind muscle connection. Like that's a really good thing to be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And I mean, for me, like coming off of chest, so I did like bent over laterals for 20, superset with band pull aparts for 20, did that 2 sets with no feeder or warm ups. And then it was right into like single arm cable, side lateral, 10 full range, 20 partials, supersetted with spider crawls. And then I finished with Y raises till I couldn't pick my arms up. I did that twice.
That sounds
And
awesome.
that's it.
And that was all you did on the session? Or
For
was that
shoulder.
after?
That was that for chest. So for chest, I did hammer strength, incline, top set and back off. I did hammer strength decline, supersetted with slight incline dumbbell flies. I did 2 sets of that, and then I did rest pulls on high cable crossover. So, I mean, of my training days, out not counting arms, like I try to purposely do the least amount of stuff possible, and it's because it's like
Sure.
those are two of my better body parts, and I don't of all the allocation of volume, those just need enough to stay full and big. And what's funny is they're as big and as best as they've ever been. So it's like
Love
I'm
it.
I'm onto something. Um, so yeah. Anything you
Love
want to
it.
add to wrap up shoulders?
No, I think we covered everything. And we actually covered shoulders today.
No, I'm really proud of myself and us as a whole.
Yeah, seriously, like we didn't start talking. Well, I didn't go off on any too nerdy rabbit holes, I don't
No,
think.
no, no. And I didn't do some kind of weird rant about how I hate fill in the blank.
Those rants are so great. It's you just throwing Thor's hammer.
Yes, yes, yeah, 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 yeah. It's like uh, I will a little bit of a rant to finish because it wouldn't be an episode if it wasn't, right? Like I have to like double down on this. Like if the person you're getting shoulder advice from doesn't have shoulders, please don't listen. Like if they don't have them, they aren't posting client progress photos of just blown out delts. Like why are we taking what they're saying even though they sound really smart? Like one of my clients sent me this video of this bikini girl doing a shoulder workout, and they're like, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Dear God, do not do this. It's horrible." I was like, "Does she have delts?" No.
Do you remember what it was? Now I'm curious. Now I just want the tea.
Yeah. So it was super heavy dumbbell shoulder press for like sets of 3 and 4, and the range of motion was not good. It was like
I'm just picturing like this.
it
Yeah.
was more work getting them into place than pressing them. And then it was what I will jokingly call like a front raise, but it's supposed to be a side delt. So it's like a shrug. It's like here and then here. Stop it. Um, it was a kettlebell swing to overhead like extension. I'm like, can you just train shoulders and not glutes? Like, can you just chill?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was a lunge to bicep curl to shoulder press. That was the workout. And then it was shrugs, heavy shrugs. Yeah, yeah,
That makes me kind of sad.
it is. And the video
It
had like
actually like makes me like sad on the inside.
the video had over 10,000 likes. I'm like, oh God, please.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
that's sad.
yeah. It hurts. It hurts. So the just remember, not all the information is good information, just because it's out there.
That's true. That's a good way of saying it.
Another cool thing is if like,
Take meat, leave the bone.
right, yes, yes.
Although there wasn't any meat in that one, it sounds like.
No, no, no. Yeah.
Kidding.
So until next time, Chris, Danny, you're done. Blow your shoulders up. That's what we want.